We turn today to 1 Thessalonians and chapter 2 and verse 7. We were considering in our last study some of the qualities that should characterize any true messenger of the gospel, any true servant of the Lord Jesus Christ. Paul gives us his own example in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. 2 Corinthians is another book where Paul reveals to us the type of man he was. And 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 and Philippians chapter 3 are two other passages from the epistles where we get a glimpse into the life, the inner life of the Apostle Paul that made him the type of servant of God that he became, the effective, useful Christian worker that he was. We considered in our last study from verses 2 to 6 some of the characteristics of Paul as a servant of God. Continuing in verse 7, he says, "We were gentle among you. We behaved gently in a mild manner in your midst." Gentleness is a very important qualification in a true servant of Christ. Later on, towards the end of his life, when Paul writes to Timothy, he says in 2 Timothy chapter 2, 2 Timothy 2 verse 24 and 25, "And the Lord's servant must never be quarrelsome, but be kind to all people, able to teach, patient when wronged, with gentleness correcting those who are in opposition." When people oppose us, it becomes quickly manifest whether we have gentleness in our lives or not. If we are quarrelsome, we are unfit to be servants of Christ. If we don't know what it is to be kind and patient towards those who harm us and hurt us, then we are unfit to be servants of Christ. Paul says, "We were gentle among you." And further, he says, "As a nursing mother cherishes and tenderly cares for her own children, thus we yearned for you and had a fond affection for you." Verse 8. A true servant of God, in a sense, is like a mother. And you know what all a mother has to undergo in order to bring forth children. It's easy to be a preacher. It's quite a different thing to be a spiritual mother. The great lack in our country and throughout the world is not of preachers and teachers. It is of spiritual mothers and fathers. And a true servant of God must be a mother and a father. Later on in verse 11, Paul says he was a father too, but a mother as well. For example, in Galatians and chapter 4, Paul, writing to the Galatian Christians, says this. He says, "I travail in birth," Galatians 4:19, "my children, with whom I am again in labor, until Christ is formed in you." That's the language of a mother giving birth to a baby. That travail and labor that Paul went through was a travail and labor in prayer and in concern, which made him write letters to them, which made him visit them and exhort them and challenge them, which made him carry them in his heart in prayer and thanksgiving. Why does he say again in labor in Galatians 4:19? He'd already been in travail once before to bring them to the new birth, from heathenism to Christ. And now he's in labor again for a second purpose, that these born-again Christians might now be conformed to the likeness of Christ. There's a twofold travail that a true servant of God has as a mother. First, to bring people to Christ in evangelism, the travail of evangelism. And then secondly, the travail of disciple-making and of leading them to conformity to the likeness of Christ. And Paul travailed as a mother. And you know, a mother is not seeking as to what she can get from her children, but what she can give. And this is a very important aspect of motherhood that must be reproduced in every true servant of Christ. As a mother cares and provides for her children. It's not the children, it's not the baby who provides for the mother. It's the mother who provides for the baby. So he says, we had a fond affection for you. Blessed are those who have spiritual leaders like this. Blessed are those who serve the Lord like this, for they follow in the footsteps of Paul, Silas, and Timothy. He says, we were well pleased to impart to you, notice this, not only the gospel, but also our own lives, because you had become very dear to us. In other words, they were willing to lay down their life. Paul, Silas, and Timothy were willing to lay down their lives to bless and help these Thessalonian Christians. We have no right to preach to others if we are not willing to lay down our life, sacrifice what we have, give our time, our energy, money, everything, that others might be blessed. This is so important, dear friends. Here is the reason why many fail to be true servants of God. They are not willing to lay down their lives. They are seeking things from their children. They are like mothers who are seeking even from little babies what those babies can give them. Such is the disgraceful state of much that goes on by the name of Christian work in many parts of the world, including our country. But Paul was of a different type. He said, we were willing to give our lives. Then we are fit to preach the gospel when we can say that. The reason was not for some heavenly reward. No. It was because these Thessalonians had become dear to Paul. He hadn't been long among them, but they had become dear to Paul because they had turned to Christ. They were his brothers and sisters in Christ. And the love of God flooded Paul's own heart so that he loved them more than his own blood brothers and sisters. Further in verse 9, you recall, brethren, our labor and hardship, our working night and day so as not to be a burden to any of you, we proclaim to you the gospel of God. Paul's not ashamed to admit the fact and to remind them of the fact that he supported himself in preaching the gospel to them. And that was possible only through his working night and day. Paul was a tent maker, and he made tents during his spare time, sold it, thus earned his living, so that he would not be financially dependent on any of the Thessalonian Christians. He said that to the Corinthians, as we read in 1 Corinthians 9 and 2 Corinthians 11. He said that to the elders of the church in Ephesus, as we read in Acts chapter 20. And he says it here to the Thessalonians in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 9. He worked night and day so that he would not be a burden to anyone. A true servant of God must be very careful that he is not a burden to anyone. We must never make ourselves a burden to others financially or in any other way if we are to be true servants of God. This is one way by which we can identify false prophets, when they seek our money and they seek to be a burden to us in some way or the other. Further in verse 10 he says, you are witnesses, and so is God, how devoutly, uprightly, and blamelessly we behave toward you believers. Here is another characteristic of a true servant of God. There must be a fear of God that we see in their life, a devoutness, a holiness, a blamelessness in their conduct towards the other believers, a blamelessness in the way they behave towards the opposite sex. There must be an uprightness in their attitude, in their words, in their attitude to money, etc. And they should be able to say, you are witnesses to see how we lived amidst you while we were there. This was always Paul's trump card to expose the false prophets. In Acts 20, he told the elders in Ephesus, you know how for 3 years I lived in your midst, uprightly, blamelessly, not being a burden to any of you, not desiring anything from you. Verse 11, just as you know how we were exhorting and encouraging and imploring each one of you as a father would his own children. A servant of God is to be a mother, but he's also got to be a father, rebuking, challenging, all that is involved in exhorting, and encouraging also, and pleading like a father, disciplining where necessary, a father and a mother. This is a picture of a true shepherd, a true apostle. And the purpose of all this was so that, verse 12, you Thessalonians may walk in a manner worthy of the God who calls you into his own kingdom and glory. Paul had such a high concept of the God whom he served, and he knew it was a tremendous calling to be a servant of God. He lived up to that calling so that others could follow his example.